Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the University of Sheffield. For those of you who are not members of the university, thank you very much for attending this afternoon's lecture and reception honouring the career achievements of our colleague Sue Yeandle. I'm John Flint, I'm Deputy Vice President for Research for the University. We really appreciate you joining us, and I want to extend a particular welcome to Sue's family and to those of you who've travelled a considerable distance to be here. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Kelly Davidge and other colleagues for the impeccable organisation, I don't know why she's running away, of today's event. It's an absolute privilege to be asked to introduce Sue this afternoon, who I've known and worked with almost a decade now. I know Sue will cover this in a lecture, but I just want to firstly touch on briefly about Sue's career and then give some personal reflections on the contribution that Sue's made. So, first thing to say is that Sue's worked, I think I'm right in saying, Sue, in a total, or studied and worked in a total of 8 universities during her career. It's a very varied career, starting with her undergraduate degrees at Bradford, and then her PhD in sociology at the University of Kent, before initially working in research positions at Durham and then Swansea. And if you take these first 4 universities and the work that Sue did there, you could already see the key themes that have dominated Sue's scholarship being present: working lives, employment, gender, feminist perspectives, the family and the life course. So one of the things that's fascinating about Sue is how she's extended work into those themes over an entire academic course of study and engagement. Following Swansea, Sue moved to Nottingham Trent as a lecturer in social policy, and that included a very successful collaboration with the University of Bremen. And again, that's another characteristic of Sue, is her commitment and effectiveness in building international collaboration. So what Sue does is not just relevant to the UK, but it is informed by and indeed informs research policy and practice in many other nations as well. Sue then spent 40 years at Sheffield, where she became Professor of Sociology in 1997. A lot of the period that Sue spent at Sheffield was in the Centre for Regional Economic and Social Research. Sue left CRASER, as it's known, in 2005. I joined CRASER shortly afterwards. I want to reassure you that these 2 events are not connected in any way. It was just coincidence. And then Sue went on to spend a very successful and productive decade at the University of Leeds, including establishing and successfully building Circle, the Centre for International Research on Care, Labour and Inequalities. And again, all 3 of those terms have been absolutely central to the work that Sue has done. Again, that international dimension, the intersections of work, family and care, and all of this in the context of very severe and changing forms of inequality in the access to care, to working conditions and the experiences of families in the UK and beyond. As I said, there's a real consistent thread of what has driven Sue over her career. In 2015, we were delighted to attract Sue and Circle to join us here at the University of Sheffield. During that period, in addition to Circle going from strength to strength under Sue's leadership, including a really important portfolio of prestigious grants from a range of funders, Sue also made a major wider contribution to her disciplines through establishing and editing the Journal of Care and Caring, and through her curating the Sustainable Care book series for the Policy Press. Sue always recognised, I think it's fair to say, that major funding provided a robust peer, review-informed rigour and platform for her research, and also scaling up the ambition for the research and the impact that research could have. And I think that kind of ambition has always been a real marker of Sue's contribution to this university and wider academy, and of course policy and practice as well. And that was all crystallised and epitomised when Sue and colleagues secured ESRC funding for the Centre for Care. This is a very major funding commitment by the ESRC. It was also the first ESRC funded centre the University of Sheffield has ever had. So I just want to give you some sense of the achievements and the contribution that Sue's made to this university. And again, the Centre for Care epitomised many of the things that Sue's become known as a leader in interdisciplinary collaboration. The Centre thrives in a whole range of methodologies and theories and concepts drawn across a wide range of disciplines. A focus on impact, supporting organisations, working with policy, providing commentary. One of the real characteristics of Circle is its regular commentary series, so there's comments on an ongoing basis about debates, showing what works and also raising broader cultural and public awareness of the challenges around care and carers. And I think it's fair to say that one of the things that always really impressed me about Sue was that she always intended for the research of herself and her colleagues to be used for the benefit of others. It wasn't a strictly academic endeavour in that sense. So a stellar academic career by anybody's measuring, but I just wanted to conclude by offering some further brief observations about Sue herself and things that you can't always see from a website profile and a CV. Firstly, Sue has the highest standards and expectations of herself and is unbelievably hard working. And I would say those come together, and I mentioned Sue and colleagues securing the ESRC Centre for Care. These are very, very difficult things to secure. I think, as I said, that's the only centre as such, but I think we've only had two other major ESRC investments, one by a colleague actually in sociology, Helen Kennedy, and one by Craig Watkins, who's here today. And actually, Sue's approach to putting the team together, identifying what the wider community wanted, and how to persuade the ESRC to make a major investment was an absolutely exemplary approach. Whenever somebody says to me, how do you go and secure a major funding opportunity, I always say, go and speak to Sue Yeandle. Okay. The other thing as well, though, I would say, and this was really important to me personally in the years I worked with Sue, was a very, very deep commitment to her team and their progression and their career development. Unfortunately, we're still in the context in modern UK academia that some of our colleagues are on fixed-term contracts. And obviously the university and people like Craig have tried to do what they can to address that. But what always struck me about Sue is that in her head, so not written down a bit of paper, in her head, Sue could tell me the end date of every contract for every colleague in Circle who was with us on a fixed-term basis. And she had a plan for each of them in terms of how we could secure their continued employment at the university. She was also very keen to praise others, and she always made a point of telling me and other senior colleagues about the achievements of the broader team. It was never about her, and unfortunately that is not always the case in academia, but I think it was a real hallmark of Sue's approach. She always advocated very hard for her colleagues. It's fair to say we had some interesting exchanges about support and funding for the Circle over our years, but she was also somebody who understands that actually research in a university context is a collective endeavour, and it wasn't all about Sue and her team. She also made a very important contribution to the wider leadership in the faculty and the university that we all greatly appreciated. I would also say this is a sector in which unfortunately women remain underrepresented in senior leadership roles, and I think Sue provides a very important illustration about how and why senior female leadership in academia is so essential. And so obviously care is a crucial issue. It's one of the greatest social challenges of our time. Unfortunately, I think the need for you in the room working with Sue to continue in this agenda is unfortunately exemplified by the rather depressing state of the debate about social care we've seen in the general election in the last few days. But in such a context, I think we've been very fortunate to have an individual like Sue seeking to transform our knowledge and understanding and point us to where the solutions can be found, and also reminding us that care in its broadest meaning is a crucial facet of being human, and in many ways that prioritising and nurturing and supporting the concept of care is under greater threat than ever, which makes this research that Sue and others are engaged with, and many in the room are engaged with, so absolutely vital. So with my thanks on behalf of the university and the faculty, Sue, I'd like you to give your lecture, which is entitled Entwinings, Insights from a Career Studying Work, Care and Family Life. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for those very generous words and for all the support you've given me over all of the time that I've been here at the University of Sheffield. As you said, we missed each other at Crazer, but I think we came together and found some ways of working together very fruitfully after I moved here to Sheffield in 2015. I've called my talk this afternoon, or before I say any more as well, can I add my thanks to John, to all of you for coming here today. It's wonderful for me to see people from my academic past and also some of my nearest and dearest family and friends. So thank you to all of you who have made the effort to come here today, for coming along. I've called the talk Entwinings, Insights from a Career Studying Work, Care and Family Life. 50 years have elapsed since my undergraduate days. My subsequent career has spanned a period in which critical phenomena that characterise all human societies, work, care and family life, have become increasingly and probably irreversibly entwined. It was not always this way. For most of the preceding 150 years, wage labour in support of industrial production was predominant as a crucial organising feature of British society. Industrial wage labour shaped its normative expectations and structural forms and had a huge impact on patterns of individual behaviour. For decades, the separation of work, care and family life created distinct areas of activity, commitment and social relations shaped profoundly by inequalities, primarily of class and of gender. Work, especially industrial production, was organised in line with rigid expectations about roles, abilities and responsibilities of men. Poorer women needed paid work to survive too. Many girls entered domestic service, others the women's trades, as they were called. On marriage, most quit their jobs to raise a family in homes where laundry, cooking and cleaning would fill almost every hour of a housewife's day. Care, looking after sick, old or disabled people and young children, was done mainly unseen. Within homes, women suffered in silence, supporting their relatives and their domestic employers. Meanwhile, behind other closed doors, what passed for care also took place in asylums, workhouses, lying-in hospitals and orphanages. Family life was a gendered private sphere. For decades, family homes were both men's property and under male control, and idealised spaces for feminine tasks and occupations in which families were sustained by women's labours of love and of service. By the 1970s, and you can see me here at that time, the separation of these spheres was fast unravelling. The evolving welfare state had improved education, health and housing. Complex social, political and economic pressures, plus insistent demands for change, feminism, campaigns against racial, sex and age discrimination and unfair work practices, struggles for disability rights and advocacy on behalf of carers, a group most, including me, had at that time barely heard of. The changes that ensued have irrevocably changed the relationship between work, care and family life. During years when all three have become longer for most, many steps have been taken to reconcile, balance and combine work and family life. Meanwhile, care has slowly come out of the shadows, courtesy mainly of the new social movements advocating for and making claims on behalf of carers, disabled people and the old. The entwinement of work, care and family life is a tumultuous process of ongoing societal change in its structural effects and forms and in its evolving practices where human agency is in play at individual, local, societal and global levels. It has had and continues to have profound implications for how we organise and experience the most important things that any human can perhaps ever do, across lifespans longer today than in any previous epoch. How we care for and support each other, how we relate to one another intimately and every day from cradle to grave, and how we organise the labour needed for survival and for the economic, social and moral development and cultural well-being of human societies all around the world. To the social scientist, these entwinings of work, care and family life call for new and evolving policy decisions and trajectories. Our task is to develop new studies to produce an evidence base that can support the planning, design and implementation of these, and new research exploring and tracking their core features and consequences. My own work as a sociologist, teacher, researcher and policy analyst, and the work of the teams and collaborations I've been part of, has been about trying to understand, as these entwinements evolve, who suffers and who thrives, who benefits and who loses out, whose contributions go unrecognised and unrewarded. It has been about looking for ways forward, for solutions to problems, and highlighting promising practices. And it has been about hearing voices previously ignored or suppressed, listening to what's said, and advocating for positive change. So in my lecture today, I want to highlight some findings relevant to the entwinement of these three spheres in studies that I've led or been involved with. Most were undertaken with some of the many wonderful colleagues I've been fortunate to work with. Before I turn to some of what we've added to knowledge in our work together about how work, care and family life intersect and have become entwined, I want to begin by briefly sketching out something John has helped me with of some of the territory we've travelled together, acknowledging their contributions and thanking those who, across my career, have inspired and impressed me. Too many to mention all by name, but you'll see many of them, in some cases yourselves, in the slides as we go. Later, I'll conclude by offering a perspective on how, by striving to understand these entwinings of care, work and family life, we can perhaps realise their potential to deliver well-being for all. First, though, I want to acknowledge the 8 universities that I have worked in, which John has helpfully saved some time for me by telling you about already. And as you can see, these were the main developments that were completed by the teams that I work with. Of course, some of these studies were conducted individually, but the vast majority of my work has been done, as John has already said, with others. And you can see here that they included things that are long gone, but which I was proud of at the time. The introduction of BA Women's Studies at Sheffield Hallam University. I think probably one of the first undergraduate courses in women's studies in the country at that time. The publications which we were able to work on together, and all of the information in blue on that slide are the titles of some of the books that I've been involved in. The really important work we did with Carers UK and in partnership with them and other organisations in the work we did on care and carers at Leeds, and then latterly the work that John's already outlined that's been such a pleasure to be involved with at the University of Sheffield. I want to thank all those on the right behind me for the huge contribution that all of you have made to my career, starting with my personal tutor and dissertation supervisor all those years ago when I was an undergraduate at Bradford, Gary Littlejohn, but also particularly Mary Evans, who was my PhD supervisor. And I want to thank all of the inspiring people who have been my colleagues over the years. Here on these slides here, you can see some people in the room. You can see some of my colleagues from Carers UK. including Caroline Walters, who was at BT when we did lots of the work on Carers UK, and who chaired the very first Employers for Carers forum, and was a massive influence on me and a fantastic speaker who anyone could learn from. So Mary Evans, my supervisor and a very important mentor for me there, but also Helga Kruger at Bremen University. John's mentioned this, but Helga invited me when I was a very young scholar to go to some meetings in Germany, which the new large research centre she was leading with others at her university had established on the life course. And that was an opportunity for me to hear and to meet some of the most important scholars working in life course studies around the world. And it made a huge impact upon me and made me realise how much work goes on outside the small sphere, which in those days, particularly without the internet and without computers, was often a closed book to many of us. You can see there some of my overseas colleagues, Teppo Kroger, Marta Sabaheli, Ito Payne, Bettina Cass, who have all been fantastic mentors and advisors to me, inspiring my work. And British scholars, Judith Phillips and Claire Anderson, who I'm delighted is here today, from whom I've learned so much. And on the other slide, Chris Booth, with whom I worked on a great programme of trying to persuade local authorities to introduce gender mainstreaming when we had Objective 1 money in South Yorkshire, and we tried to take that around the country, trying to influence opportunities to create real change for women. Fiona Williams, who I worked with, of course, at Leeds. Other British colleagues here on the right, Pete Orcott. Pete was my close colleague at Sheffield Hallam for quite some years, and Pete persuaded me to get involved in CRASA that John's already mentioned, and created not only opportunities for me, but also gave an example of how to study a really important topic, poverty, and the unequal society in which we live, which has been an influence on not only me, but on so many other scholars. Likewise, Fiona Williams, another star of British social policy, whom I had the privilege of working with at Leeds, and some of the other colleagues here, Joan Tronto and Michael Fine particularly, were involved in the journal that John mentioned. And Joan is a stellar scholar of global note, who it was fantastic to have joined with us there. I'm going to say more about Robert Anderson a bit later, but he's also been a huge influence on my work and helped to facilitate a lot of the studies that I've undertaken, as indeed has our Canadian colleague Nora Keating and Andrew Wakefield, whom I work with closely at the University of Leeds. I want to say a little bit, perhaps going to leave those slides up actually for a moment, where I'll say a few more things about some of these colleagues. My published books indicate some of the ways I've explored this territory over the years. Initially, my publications focused mainly on women's lives, their work and labour inside and outside the home, its evolving nature and historical origins, and the contemporary challenges women faced. Later, I turned my attention to the context and policy arrangements that shaped how the work of care and caring relations are affected by conditions and opportunities in the labour market and by evolving social policies. In this work, I began to look at developments outside the UK, in some of the world's other wealthy countries, and to observe how men's experience of work, care and family life is also affected by these same contexts, practices and social relations. My work at this time was deeply affected by my growing interest in carers, whose existence I'd barely thought about in the early years of my career. The partnership I subsequently built with Carers UK, especially with Madeline Starr, sitting here, who at a chance meeting invited me to tender for some work she was planning, created an opportunity to develop a whole new programme of impactful research on carers with its own international dimensions, coinciding with a separate programme, equally ambitious and wide-ranging, on gender and local labour markets, where trying to make a real difference with our studies was the driving force, energising me and all the team that I led at the then newly formed Centre for Social Inclusion at Sheffield Hallam University. Much of that work was ultimately completed at the University of Leeds when I moved there with some of the team in 2006. Since joining the University of Sheffield in 2015, I've had the great pleasure of working with many talented scholars around the world on the International Journal of Care and Caring, whose founding editor I became in 2016. In the journal, I've tried to bring a focus on care and caring throughout the world to enable transnational learning about how care, work and family are entwined, and at times in tension or conflict elsewhere in the world, in Africa, Latin America and Asia, as well as across Europe, in the liberal democracies around the world that still bear the stamp of the UK's colonial past, and in the USA. Simultaneously, I've also led 2 successful teams, as John has mentioned, that secured the ESR funding we spoke about, first to study sustainable care, connecting people and systems, and later to establish the current Centre for Care. These multi-university collaborations have benefited from strong international connections and involve work with great scholars and a fantastic professional services team led by Kelly Davidge, where Kelly, can't see you at the back, and the rest of the team I think are in the room, which has done so much to support and attract attention to our work. So I'm going to say a few things about these topics in the rest of my talk before I conclude. I cannot, of course, summarise all that I've learned through my research, writing and editing. All were mostly joint endeavours, and I'm enormously grateful to have had so many wise and talented co-authors, co-researchers and co-editors throughout my career. What I can do in my talk this afternoon is share insights from a few of the collaborations that have led me to believe that the entwining of work, care and family life is a genuinely positive development in human relations and human societies. It is, of course, still very much unfinished business. Many carers, parents, workers and families are under huge pressure and desperate for more support and fairer working conditions. Important progress has been made nevertheless. Despite many missteps, our present century is ever more transnational in its relationships and exchanges. We have the technology and capability to enable caring, familial and working relationships that go way beyond the local. We can create meaningful and supportive networks of care, work and family to help women and men of all ages and abilities to flourish and live well through entwined and interconnected practices and relations in their work, care and family lives, whether in close proximity, at a distance or transnationally. And I know I'm not the only one in the room who has family around the globe and with whom it's important to remain in close and meaningful contact. In the next part of my talk, I focus on some of what we've learned from studying our own society and by looking outward with interest and optimism at what has been achieved in other parts of the world. I'll also show you some images of our work together that highlight some of the benefits and pleasures of working in teams. I'll conclude with a few special words for the early careers researchers and PhD students whose work I've had the pleasure of supervising. I've spoken already of how the spheres of work, care and family life, relatively separate in the heyday of industrial capitalism, have become increasingly entwined over the course of my career. Let's briefly consider a few of the ways in which each in the UK has been profoundly changed. For families, life is more diverse, flexible and dispersed. People have fewer children, more varied cultural heritages, and more generations coexist. The convoys that sociologist Tony Antonucci writes about stretch over longer lives as each person's networks of connections and support ebb and flow across more varied life courses. In paid work, the rigidities of industrial timekeeping have all but disappeared. Once the province of men and younger workers, while housewives dealt with homes and children, paid work is now expected of all. The working mothers I studied in 1980, few of whom had expected to return to work after having children, are now very much the norm. Women's participation in the labour force has become indispensable for family finances and for the economy. The manual labour once needed in manufacturing and heavy industry has given way to jobs in distribution, business and services. Today, many workers work varied hours, often over 7-day working weeks, working remotely or travelling as they work, many in precarious self-employment or on 0-hours contracts. Only a few have good access to the flexibility, leaves and support needed for their own and societal well-being. As for care, its hidden nature continues in the work of millions of unpaid carers whose moments in the media limelight seem rapidly to fall off political agendas. The increased need for care due to sick and disabled people's longer lives, an outcome of universal health care and advances in medicine, hygiene and safety, has not been planned for. Ageing in place, almost universally advocated, means, it turns out, rising numbers of frail and sick older people living at home, supported mainly by their own families and networks. The dire special hospitals where disabled children were once hidden away, now thankfully closed, have been replaced by an expectation that families can provide unending care with minimal support. Some of these developments are outcomes of the uneven expansion of the welfare state in its early decades, but also of improvements in the rights and opportunities of women and disabled people in the later decades of the 20th century, and of the campaigning efforts of carers and other organisations. Work, care and family life are now entwined in all our lives in ways that are positive for most, provided each can accommodate the others. Women and men both gain when their lives embrace these three dimensions. We now know that men can be great parents and carers too, and that women can participate successfully in all areas of social life, including paid work. We've come to understand how central care is, intermissively from our first years, when every child requires care, to our last days. We have learned that supporting those we love through illness and to live well with disability is life-enhancing. And we've seen how disabled people, no longer hidden away, can achieve at work, provide care to others, and have rewarding family and social lives. These changes have formed the backdrop to the research I and those I have worked with have undertaken. In the rest of my lecture, I will share these insights with you. I start briefly with inequalities in the lives of women. This study, which I undertook, or the work that I undertook with Christine Booth when I was at Sheffield Hallam University, and in the chapter here that I wrote on women and work, really drew my attention to the opening up of inequalities between women and men, between women in the labour force. And you can see here on the slide my observation that at one poll across the spectrum, women had demanding careers, good salaries and benefits, with lifestyles supported by by paid service workers, whereas other women held multiple low-paid jobs, frequently worked unsocial hours, and were intermittently dropping in and out of employment. I went on to do a piece of work which was very important in my development, and I think the development of other young scholars, led by Professor Claire Anderson, who is with us here this afternoon. Claire designed this study to look at the new ways of trying to support care that were being developed under the overarching rubric of cash for care, but which in England were exemplified by the introduction of direct payments. The study was carried out in four other countries besides England. One of the things that we concluded as we finished the book together, that we wrote about that study, was that whilst these developments did not offer governments a panacea, there were situations in which for many people, particularly including disabled people and some older people, benefited significantly from the opportunities created. But as we went on to point out, if those schemes were used to exploit or marginalise those who deliver that care, or to pressurise people into care work, or into providing care for which they're unprepared or unwilling to give, those schemes themselves will risk falling into disrepute and will contribute to the inequalities in social care that confront us. And we read that back some 20-odd years ago, and I think it's just as true today. Now, I want to move on now to another really important project, the Gender and Employment in Local Labour Markets project, which was developed with very significant and very influential input by Lisa Buckner, who is here in the room today. And thank you, Lisa, for coming along. For many years, Lisa and I worked together on the Gender and Employment in Local Labour Markets project. Lisa devised the gender profiles of the 12 local authority labour markets that we studied and gave those administrations at the local level information about women's work that they'd never previously had. I can't underscore how important that was. When we looked at labour market profiles in planning that, we discovered that most of them, though great thick documents, usually had 2 pages at the front which pointed out that most women work part-time and that they left the labour market earlier than men, and then went on to write about everybody as if they were all the same. So we looked at everything we could think of about the labour market with a gendered lens, and that was important work. We also undertook 6 studies on the topics that are shown there in the slide, which were carried out in each of them in 4, 5 or 6 of the local authorities. And each of them made its own contribution, which is relevant to how work and care and life are intertwined. And I wanted to just pause briefly here on working below potential, women and part-time work, because that study really showed, it was supported by the involvement we had from the Equal Opportunities Commission, and it really showed the dreadfully poor nature of the part-time work that was available to women at that time. There were limited good quality jobs on the open labour market, and this meant that part-time jobs lacked routes for career progression. Women felt that their employers didn't care about their careers or have any interest in seeing them progress. And they were right, because the managers that Linda Grant, who did heroic efforts to deliver a huge study, you can see from the details there on the slide, that most of them hadn't really ever thought about what they might be able to do for the women who were working with them. And they rarely advertised any good quality part-time jobs. And the transformation that has occurred in part-time work over the period that I've been speaking about is partly the result of allowing people flexibility at work in which they can ask to turn their full-time job into a part-time job for a period without having to drop out of work and go in right at the bottom, wasting, as you can see here, at the time we did the study in 2004, wasting the contributions that were potentially there of 3.6 million part-time workers. And here you can see at the final conference, Lisa will remember this very well, we were fortunate that the TUC gave us free access to Congress House, and we had a huge conference there, which the chair of ACAS, Rita Donaghy, chaired for us, and that was a fantastic occasion where we felt that we were really achieving an impact with our work. Now, I want to also talk about the research we did on caring and employment around this same time, much of which, as I've already mentioned, was developed in partnership with Madeline Starr at Carers UK. We'd had the opportunity, because the census had in 2001 asked for the first time a question about people's caring responsibility. That enabled us, that unpaid caring responsibility, enabled us to interrogate that phenomenon across all the other details that are available in a census when we fill in our census forms. And so that research on caring and employment made a huge difference to our understanding of many of the issues. And I want to particularly mention the Carers Employment and Services study, which Madeline will recall extremely well. This study, which I think I thought was going to produce one report, Madeline decided was going to be broken up into a number of targeted, impactful sets of key messages for different audiences. And when she first told me that she wanted me to write 6 reports, not to mention another 12, or I think it was 10 perhaps, for all the different local areas where we'd done specific studies, I think the team thought that I had, perhaps Madeline and I had gone collectively mad. But actually that work was both incredibly rewarding, and as we took it on a sort of a roadshow around the country, and Lisa will remember some of this very well, that we really got engagement from people who hadn't really thought about how caring and employment might be important for understanding how local labour markets, local social services and family well-being ought to operate. And you can see there that work was cited extensively in government and parliamentary reports, and it influenced employers and trade unions and paved the way for strong engagement with the Employers for Carers Forum. And I think some of its findings remain absolutely as relevant today as they were in 2007. We've carried on working on research on working carers, and I'm proud to say that we did a big piece of work on this within the Sustainable Care programme that Jason Hayes in our business school here at Sheffield led with the wonderful Annie Austin, who sadly died far too young just after completing that piece of work. But that study of supporting working carers really shows, in a powerful piece of work that we developed with an external partner, enabled us to show that when workers are supported at work to manage their care responsibilities, significant benefits flow. And there were really big differences in well-being, in mental health, in feeling like you wanted to quit your work or that you've had the opportunity to develop your careers across that variable. And we've continued, still now in the Centre for Care, the team there is still continuing to do significant work on that topic. Before I move on to the Sustainable Care Programme, I just want to thank Lisa and also Dr. Gary Fry, who now works at the University of Bradford, who worked really, really hard on those pieces of work that we did at Leeds. Gary in particular traipsed up and down the country to the north of Scotland and to the furthest depths of Wales, as well as across England, collecting the 134 interviews with working carers that we undertook as part of that study. And Lisa, as I've already mentioned, was absolutely pivotal in much of the work. You can see some of the team there at Leeds University shortly before I moved to Sheffield. I want to also talk about some other work that we did at the University of Leeds, and these were the evaluations of government programmes of carer support. We evaluated the government's Caring with Confidence programme. This was a programme of work designed to implement the Labour government's National Carer Strategy. Let's hope we might have another one of those one day. But that programme saw more than 10,000 carers benefit from those training opportunities. And the other piece of work, the National Demonstrator Sites programme that was funded by the Department of Health, which looked at how we can support carers' health and well-being, had more than 13,000 women go through it. And talking to carers' organisations and caring academics in the field around the world, I'm pretty confident that those are the biggest evaluation studies and the biggest programmes of support for carers that anyone has ever developed anywhere in the world. So we ought to keep looking at them. And when I look at them, I find it extraordinary that, and some of the things that were said about them, I find it extraordinary that our own department seem to have forgotten all about it, although some of our colleagues in other parts of the world seem to know about that work and have found it of value. I'm going to move on now to mention the work that we did, the final piece of work, really, the large piece of work that we did at Leeds, which was the Active project, which was the first piece of work I worked on with Kate Hamblin. Kate was then at the Oxford Institute of Population Ageing at the University of Oxford, and I'd joined forces with one of her colleagues, Andreas Hoff, to put the bid together, and thinking that we would be better together than separately. Andreas landed a professorship in Germany just before we got the money, and so Kate came to the fore. And it was a challenge for her, I'm sure, because she was quite early in her career then, and she had a lot of responsibility, and she did a fantastic job on enabling us to put the focus in work on technology and care on how older people's everyday lives are affected when we introduce what we then called telecare into their lives, and to explore options and barriers in that. And that work done with industrial partners as well as across the two universities, I think was truly influential, and I was amazed to discover, I didn't have that picture myself, I was amazed to discover that picture still on the internet, and to think back across the other work we did, including with Carers Scotland, looking at how technology can support carers, with Sense, the charity that supports deafblind people, to try to build thinking about how we can really improve people's lives by appropriate use of technology that's well supported and well integrated into their real world lives. I've got a few slides here of some of the contacts we had in Australia, and I would say that Australia is an area where we've worked quite a lot on technology and care issues. particularly with Kate O'Loughlin there on the right of that slide, speaking there in Perth. Kate was a wonderful colleague at the University of Sydney, has become a great friend of mine. And some of the work that we've done over the years internationally, here funded by the Worldwide Universities Network, that enabled some of my collaborations, has been really important. I want to move now to the Sustainable Care Programme. And here you can see some of the outputs, just a very small sample of the many publications that were produced. Dan Williamson and Kelly Davidge on the slide there, Dan in particular, enthusiastically helped with Kelly with the design of these as well, in ensuring that we got our messages across online and that we did a huge amount of interconnected work to support the impact of that programme. And I'm proud to say that we have published 3 books in the Policy Press Sustainable Care series, or in fact, Combining Work and Care is about to come out in a few weeks' time, edited by Kate and colleagues. But Kate also edited the book, was an international comparison book on care technologies for ageing societies, with Matthew Lariviere, who is also here today, an excellent contribution to the international literature on that topic, and Catherine Needham and Patrick Hall did a fine piece of work comparing the work on how social care has developed over the years since responsibility for social care and for health has been devolved to the UK's national administrations. I want to just show you a few pictures of, I said I would show you how much we've enjoyed working together. So I just put a few photographs together, which I thought some of you might enjoy seeing, just to give you a sense of some of the things we've done together. Our trips funded by additional awards secured from the ESRC to Taiwan and Tokyo, where we learnt so much about the way some of the work supporting people to manage care and fit it into their complex lives is undertaken there. Lots of generous contributions and sharing from international colleagues about how things can be done. And the team always willing to enjoy some time together. Pictures here of some of the things we did with the innovation fellows that we secured with Madeline's help. Actually, Madeline was very important in pulling that programme of support together. The 3 scholars that we were able to support there did some fine work, including on work and care. And here you can see some of us with Kelly always looking after our interests. Here we are visiting Canada and Australia as part of our studies, and building connections and finding out about the way things are done elsewhere as well. I'm going to move on next to this slide, which shows how we've also exchanged our learning with academics in other parts of the world through participating in international conferences. And perhaps one of the most important of those in recent years has been the Transforming Care Conference, which we were invited to host in this very building a year ago. Last June, you can see the picture of the entrance hall downstairs, full of people when we were hosting the Transforming Care Conference then. The other pictures are taken from a previous Transforming Care Conference held in Copenhagen. But these are important ways for young scholars to meet each other, for PhD students to test out their ideas, and for experienced scholars such as myself to try to build networks and partnerships across the world. The Centre for Care, here I'm showing our inaugural international meeting, and one of our theory building workshops held very recently is, of course, perhaps the jewel in the crown of the things that we've achieved together. And I'm going to say a little bit more about passing on my responsibility for that in a moment. But before I do that, I want to say a little bit about Carers UK. Our very special relationship with Carers UK has been hugely valuable for the research teams that I've led. And in particular, it's really helped me to understand the relationship between work and care in a broad and deep way that I don't think would have been possible without that collaboration. Particularly important, I think, has been the amount of opportunity I've had to talk to employers and to HR professionals in the Employers for Carers Forum that is such an important way of exchanging good practice and helping organisations and professionals and just ordinary workers who want to try and manage care and work more effectively to find good ways of doing that. I think much of the work has been incredibly influential. You can see here in the pictures us celebrating the 50th anniversary in 2015, so we're not far off the diamond one that will be coming up soon. But here in the green jacket there is Baroness Pitt-Keithley, widely regarded around the world as the mother of the carers movement and an absolute star among women, who I think has done more to push forward on carers' rights than perhaps anyone present, a few present company accepted, but Jill has been absolutely fundamental to building support for carers all around the world. We still do work on carers, and I published a piece only a few weeks ago on trying to end the scandal that have come to the fore in the press recently on carers allowance. But you can see here also, again with Jill, at some of the events she's hosted in the House of Lords for different occasions, including the bottom slide here with carers leaders from the USA and I think Norway, from memory, and also with Imelda Redmond, who was a former CEO and a wonderful woman, and with my son, who works now at Carers UK and whom I'm very proud to see thriving there in the work that he does. I also want to mention Eurocarers and some of the people that have been important in the international carers movement. Madeleine, as I've mentioned, laid critical groundwork when she secured EU funding for the Action for Carers and Employment programme for 5 years, probably nearly 6, in the early 2000s. Stacey Yeandle, who now runs Eurocarers as its inspirational executive director, and they're celebrating their 20th anniversary this year. Emily Holtzhausen, who holds the connectivities between much of the international collaborations on carers. She was there in Brussels when I was there a few weeks ago with Eurocarers as they celebrated their anniversary and held their annual meeting. But she also is a key connector with the International Association of Carers Organisations too. And Emily, I'm pleased to say, was awarded the CBE in last weekend's honours list for her 30 years of unstinted support for carers as Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Carers UK. And finally, Rob Anderson, who I first met when I was at Crazer, when I was trying to get some money out of the European Foundation for the improvement of living and working conditions. Rob led foundational studies that were important in our understanding of work, care and family life, internationally comparative studies, but also set high standards for those studies and high expectations about the importance of making a difference with the work that you do. And he has given invaluable advice to our teams over many years, and I'm very grateful to all of those on this slide. So I'm now going to turn to my PhD students as I come to my closing remarks. I want to say something about I thought I should first of all recognise the incredible people that I've had the opportunity to supervise. Being a PhD supervisor is one of the real joys of an academic's life. I can't recommend it highly enough. You work with a young scholar who's got a topic they're interested in but isn't quite sure how to go about it and needs quite a lot of guidance and thinking about where to go and how to do it. And then they come out the other end and they know far more about their topic than you do, and they have got a contribution which is going to be impressive at any conference they choose to go to around the world. And some of the wonderful people that I've had the opportunity to supervise or who I'm currently supervising are on this slide. And thank you to all of you, because it's such a pleasure in my working life to have the care and the responsibility of looking after the interests of PhD students, and it's an important part of our work. So now, a few final remarks and a little bit of advice to PhD students. I think I'm going to give those bits of advice first. I thought I should say something particularly directed at early career scholars. A few thoughts based on my own reflections as I look back across the years. And as I'm going to decide, of course, you come into the mainstream and into the fray. So what tips do I have for you for the different futures you will each have and for a rewarding life as a social scientist? Well, I think I've got 6 points and I'm going to go through them very quickly. First of all, stay curious about the world, how the world ticks, about its problems and about how your work could help. Keep learning and listening. There is always more to know and there are always others whose knowledge and insights will help you. Stay connected and cherish your contacts. These are the people who will inspire, encourage and help you along the way. Be your authentic self, find your own path and follow the trails along your way. Try always to make a difference and use your findings to advocate for change. And finally, as your work diversifies, as it surely will, look for the common threads. And I wish all of you and all who have or have sent good wishes the very best of luck. So a few closing thoughts about the role of human agency in entwining work, care and family life, by which I mean what we think about, what we plan and choose to do individually as our family lives and relationships evolve, and in our studies, our careers, our paid work and our unwaged endeavours. Progress in entwining work, care and family life, separate spheres not so long ago, as I've mentioned, has been hard won, but there's much still to do. Many struggles and campaigns lie behind the progress made for women's rights to education, work and in the home, for workers' rights to respect and fairness in the workplace, for childcare, and for the rights and support needed by sick, injured and disabled people, and of course, by carers. In my own field, the interconnections of work and care, much progress has been made, including by some of you. I'm thinking here especially of Emily, Madeline and John, here today from Carers UK, but also Pam Walton and of Helen Jackson, who pushed so hard on these agendas too. Helen was an MP for Sheffield and a big influence and encouragement to me to try and reach out and to engage with policymakers and with politicians in the work that we did. Your contributions have been pivotal in pressing embassy for change and in working with researchers like me to ensure your arguments are underpinned by evidence. Yet still for many, combining work, care and family life remains a daily struggle, especially for those in precarious or low-paid work and living in the disadvantaged circumstances which still characterise our far too unequal society. And that is what I was speaking about on the 14th of May last month, when I was invited to speak at Carers UK's conference on the future of work. And I still believe that's a really important set of issues. At the end of May, I passed the baton for the Centre to Care to Kate Hamlin, and I know it is in good hands. Kate will now work with Centre Manager Dr. Kelly Davidge, to whom warm thanks for her extraordinary contributions and support over the years, and with the rest of the team to push forward on these and related agendas. I wish them, and of course all of you, all the very best for the future. But what's next for me? Well, I owe my family, who have sustained and put up with me over the decades, huge thanks to especially Simon, my partner, and our 2 sons, John, here today as already mentioned, and Rob, who's currently in Sydney and not able to be here in person. My life will have 2 other important components beyond the work that I plan to do on my book on the international carers movement and the supervision of my ongoing PhD students, which will keep me busy for a couple more years yet. But I also have the care of my dad, pictured here Saturday before last, at the age of, well, on Friday he'll be 103. So a good life, but he's very frail now and he needs some more of my support. Time for peace and reflection as I work in my garden, pictured there. And finally, I just want to say thank you to all of them and to all of you, and to thank the Centre for Care team for a beautiful gift for my garden, which Kelly delivered to me yesterday afternoon, as it was too heavy for me to carry home after the lecture, and for which I am really, really grateful. So Thank you all very much indeed, and I now think I hand over to Kate for a few final comments.